Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Comically Speaking with SPAZ. This episode is going to be slightly different than the ones I've done before. What I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on pop culture in comic books. Now, we all know that comic books have bled over into pop culture with DC movies and Marvel movies, TV series, breakfast cereals, Underoos, things like that. But what I'm going to do is briefly look at just how pop culture has bled into comic books. And this is far from a complete collection because I have far from a complete bank account. But I'm going to touch on some titles that I've pulled out of my comic book boxes just for this episode here. So we're going to start off with movies first, as in feature films, theatrical releases, and we'll start off with House 2. Of course, I would have loved to start off with House 1, but House 2 is all that I have. And there it is right there. Then we'll go over to The Island of Dr. Moreau. This is that movie. I believe it was Val Kilmer and Marlon Brando, but there's that. Love Aliens, and I love the movies Independence Day, and there's two of them here. Here is a Superboy comic book, but it features Bonnie and Clyde. If you can see that there, Superboy featuring Bonnie and Clyde. My brother and I were huge fans of the movie Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, so I was happy to come across Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, separate comics. Issues number 1 of each of those, and those are fun. A lot of these titles, by the way, you can find in 50-cent bins, $1 bins. These aren't cool, trust me. It's not like everyone's walking around going, oh, I've got a copy of Police Academy. No, it's not cool to like these things. But I like the odd and the weird and the strange. So, of course, there is one issue of Police Academy. There was a series of those. Does anybody remember the Emilio Estevez Mick Jagger movie Free Jack? Well, I do, and that's why I own a comic book based on the movie. This is 2019, and they're making a new Dune movie. But I do have a 3-issue series focusing on the old Dune movie starring Kyle MacLachlan. Saturday Night Live gave birth to many movies, one of which was Coneheads. This is not TV. This is the actual movie because there's a Chris Farley type character there. Now let's switch to television. Everybody loves the Flintstones, but does everybody remember Pebbles and Bam Bam? I think everybody remembers Beavis and Butthead. Another fun TV series, not a cartoon, I'm going to break up the cartoons here, was Ghost Whisperer. I used to watch that, but how can you deny Jennifer Love Hewitt? I mean, hello. Going back to cartoons, Hanna-Barbera's Laugh Olympics. You can see Yogi, and I'm a huge fan of Little Rascals, and they eventually made it. Spanky and Alfalfa and Little Rascals made it into the comic form, as did the Lone Ranger, and of course Mickey Mouse Club. Remember, I'm showing you one comic because that's all I own, but more than likely there's 50, 60 for every one of these. There's Gentle Ben. Dennis Weaver was the main star, but of course the bear and the kid stole everybody's hearts, and the kid was played by Clint Howard. And everybody knows that Clint Howard was the brother of Happy Days' Ron Howard. This is probably one of the worst comic covers I've ever seen in my life. But it does have Richie Cunningham and the Fonz, so you can't deny it. And then what about Nanny and the Professor? That's right. I mean, come on. Phoebe Figolilli is a silly name. There's also Welcome Back, Kotter. Mr. Cotter. There's a difference between Justice League and Super Friends. And there is Super Friends. It's the more lighthearted Saturday morning cartoon featuring the Wonder Twins. I don't think they're on the cover there. And who doesn't love Alf? I know about 5 million people that don't love Alf, but I know about 4.5 million people that do. There is an issue of Alf. And back when we were kids, my brother and I used to love to watch Dark Shadows. And there is there's been a couple of variations, like the Dark Shadows series, I think, went for probably a couple of years, and then they tried to invigorate it later on. I think not as successful as, obviously, the original early days. Mr. T was a big part of the A-Team's success. There's the first 2 issues of the A-Team. There was a dolphin, and they called him Flipper. And then there's the Partridge Family. Oh, how we loved Danny Partridge's zany antics. But, of course, the girls loved David Cassidy, Keith Partridge. And this is not a Partridge Family comic, but it's a comic called I Love You. And it features David Cassidy. A really awful pullout, but it's still fun. And finally, from my stack of TV shows, Twilight Zone. And then moving away from movies and TV, let's get into some slightly different things. If you're macho, you're going to love NFL Super Pro, featuring Spider-Man. And then Marvel paid a tribute to the Marines with the Semper Fi series. Toys sold and continue to sell well, including Raggedy Ann and Andy. Those are 2 very old titles there. This toy was popular in the 80s. I never bought one, but they were really popular. Mad Balls. If anybody remembers Mad Balls. I'm feeling really thirsty and my throat is dry. Hey, Kool Aid! That's right, Kool Aid Man. Why I'm fascinated by pop culture in comic books, I'll never know. But I do love it. It's a whole lot of fun. I made a video a while ago talking about music in comic books. Here's a few that I did not feature. The Mighty Thor with the homage to the Clash's London Calling album. If you could take a look at that. I believe I did talk about this, but I always love to feature the Lennon Sisters. Also there on the back as well. And here's where toys and music collide. This is the Transformers, and that's cool and well enough, right? This is well before the movies, obviously, because look, it's the Transformers and Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band. How can you deny the awesomeness of that? That is pretty amazing. And finally, I just have a small stack of celebrity comic books. Most of the time, the celebrities had nothing to do with the comic books whatsoever. They just licensed their name and their likeness and let them go. There was a bunch of Boris Karloff titles. Bob Hope had a series out. I love these 2 because they both feature the Universal monsters, such as Dracula, Frankenstein, Wolfman, and those are Bob Hope titles. The Majesty of Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis. How I love them so. But it looks like Dean Martin didn't hang out in the comic books much, but Jerry did. There was a bunch of Jerry Lewis comics out. Finally, my favorites of everything that I've talked about here, my absolute favorites. Nobody would expect the wisecracking Don Rickles to be in a comic book, but they did not know. Nobody would expect the wisecracking Don Rickles to make an appearance in a comic book. Not only did he make an appearance in one comic book, he made an appearance in 2 comic books, both drawn by the great, the legendary King Jack Kirby. And they were Superman's pal, Jimmy Olsen. And they both feature the late, great Don Rickles, my favorite comedian. But anyway, that is it. I hope you enjoyed this sort of excursion into pop culture in comic books. I'll be a little bit more focused with a shorter video next time. But I appreciate you hanging out and having fun with me. I encourage you all to visit your local comic shop today, tomorrow, any day of the week. Wednesdays is new release day, but you can go any other day and you could find something in the bins, back issues, something in the 50-cent or the dollar bins. It's always fun. It's a great experience. Remember that comics, it's art, it's history, it's pop culture. For this episode of Comically Speaking, this is Spaz. Fin Fang Foom!